At exactly 9:12 a.m., my father tapped the side of his crystal champagne glass until every conversation inside the ballroom faded into silence. The room smelled of fresh lilies and expensive coffee. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting against polished marble floors that looked too perfect for the family standing on them. Lawyers, financial advisors, business partners, and relatives turned toward the small stage with polite smiles, expecting another speech about legacy. They had no idea they were about to witness something much uglier. I stood near the back of the room, wearing a charcoal gray suit that blended into the crowd. That was nothing new. My family had spent years making me invisible. My father smiled proudly as he placed one hand on my younger sister's shoulder. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "today I'm proud to announce that Brielle will officially oversee our family's $8,450,000 investment portfolio." Applause erupted almost instantly. Brielle lowered her eyes with practiced humility before flashing the smile everyone adored. Cameras clicked from every direction. She knew exactly how to perform gratitude. I simply watched. No surprise. No anger. Just observation. That confused them more than any outburst ever could. My mother stepped closer to Brielle and adjusted a loose strand of her hair before kissing her forehead. "You've always been the one who could carry this family forward," she whispered loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. Several people nodded approvingly. I recognized many of the faces. Investment bankers, corporate attorneys, community leaders. People who believed appearances told the entire story. What they didn't know is that my grandfather had spent years teaching me how money actually moved. He taught me to read balance sheets before I learned to drive. He believed wealth meant responsibility, not applause. No one mentioned his wishes that morning. Not once. Instead, my father raised another glass. "Some people earn trust," he said, glancing directly at me. "Others only know how to resent success." The room grew strangely quiet. Everyone understood exactly who he meant. A woman standing beside me shifted uncomfortably. Another guest looked toward the floor. No one defended me. They never did. Brielle finally spoke. "I'll do everything I can to honor our family's reputation." More applause. She sounded sincere. That was always her greatest talent. She knew how to make ambition sound like kindness. My father turned fully toward me. "You should congratulate your sister." His voice stayed calm, almost gentle. That made it worse. I walked forward slowly until only a few feet separated us. "I'm happy the family has confidence in her," I said. Nothing more. My answer wasn't what they expected. My father frowned. "That's all?" I smiled politely. "What else would you like me to say?" He folded his arms. People who lose opportunities usually become jealous. A few nervous laughs drifted through the room. Then he looked directly into my eyes. "Don't become one of those people." My mother sighed dramatically before stepping between us. "Naomi," she said softly, "family loyalty matters more than fairness." Those words settled over the room like cold rain. Family loyalty. I had heard that sentence my entire life. Whenever Brielle received opportunities one earned. Whenever my accomplishments disappeared from family conversations. Whenever I was expected to apologize simply to restore peace. Peace had always required my silence. Never hers. Growing up, relatives constantly praised Brielle's lighter skin, softer features, and effortless charm. "She photographs beautifully. She has the perfect look. She'll open doors." I heard those comments so often they eventually stopped sounding cruel. They simply became normal. Meanwhile, every achievement I earned came with another condition. Work harder. Smile more. Be grateful. Don't intimidate people. Don't outshine your sister. Eventually, I stopped chasing approval altogether. That decision changed everything. Brielle approached carefully. "I hope this doesn't change anything between us." I met her eyes. It already has. She looked confused. Not offended. Confused. Because she genuinely believed none of this had cost me anything. That was the tragedy. She never questioned why every road had been cleared for her while I climbed alone. The celebration continued around us. Servers carried silver trays through the ballroom. Someone laughed near the orchestra. Champagne glasses clinked together. Life moved forward as though nothing important had happened. They thought they were celebrating a victory. I knew I was attending a performance. At 11:36 a.m., I quietly slipped outside into the warm summer air. For the first time that morning, I could hear birds instead of applause. My phone vibrated. Unknown number. It went a voicemail before I answered. A few seconds later, I pressed play. A familiar voice spoke calmly. Naomi, this is Jonathan Mercer, your grandfather's attorney. If you're hearing this, please come to my office before sunset. Your grandfather instructed me to release an unopened package only under today's circumstances. It's time. The message ended. I stared at the screen for several long seconds. An unopened package. After all these years. I slowly slipped my phone back into my pocket and looked through the ballroom windows where my family continued celebrating without me. They believed they had finally written the last chapter of my story. They had absolutely no idea my grandfather had started writing the next 1 year earlier. 3 days after the celebration, my phone still carried the photographs everyone else seemed determined to admire. There was Betrayal, smiling beneath the ballroom lights while my parents stood proudly beside her. Every local business page had reposted the announcement. Friends congratulated her. Community leaders praised her. Even people who barely knew our family called her the future of our grandfather's legacy. I never responded. Instead, I opened another file. Balance sheets had always made more sense to me than family conversations. Growing up, I learned very early that love inside my house came with conditions. My father loved achievements that improved his reputation. My mother loved peace that protected appearances. Neither one knew how to love the child who asked uncomfortable questions. Brielle never had that problem. She walked into every room with effortless confidence, her lighter complexion drawing compliments before she even introduced herself. She's absolutely beautiful. She has such an elegant look. She's the face of success. Those words followed her everywhere. When relatives looked at me, the compliments always came with extra instructions. You're so intelligent. If you smiled more. If you softened your personality. If you dressed differently. There was always another condition. Another adjustment. Another reminder that who I naturally was somehow needed improvement. After enough years, I stopped asking for approval. I earned degrees instead. Law school taught me something my family never could. Evidence has no favorites. Contracts do not care about appearances. Facts cannot be manipulated forever. Late Tuesday afternoon, I arrived at my office overlooking downtown Atlanta. The city stretched beneath the windows in silver glass and afternoon sunlight. Air conditioning hummed quietly while traffic drifted through the streets below like distant waves. My assistant placed a folder on my desk. Brielle's new investment campaign is everywhere. I noticed. Would you like me to remove the articles from your media alerts? I closed the folder without opening it. No. She hesitated. You don't seem surprised. I rarely am. After she left, I finally opened the financial reports. The newest real estate investment fund carried one familiar name. Caldwell Strategic Capital. The managing partner was Ethan Caldwell. His reputation bordered on legendary. Magazine covers. Television interviews. Charity galas. He was celebrated as the white investment executive who supposedly transformed struggling neighborhoods into profitable developments. People called him a visionary. Lawyers called him careful. Investors called him brilliant. I called him interesting. not because I admired him. Because people with flawless public images usually spent enormous amounts of money protecting them. 2 evenings later, I attended a fundraising reception where Ethan delivered the keynote address. The ballroom smelled of polished wood, expensive cologne, and fresh roses. Crystal chandeliers reflected against polished floors, while waiters carried trays of sparkling water through the crowd. Brielle stood beside Ethan wearing a designer dress that cameras clearly loved. She noticed me almost immediately. "I didn't expect you to come. I support community investment." She smiled politely. "I'm glad." Ethan extended his hand. "So, you're the attorney?" "I am. I've heard impressive things." "Thank you." He smiled, but his eyes remained calculating. "It's refreshing to meet someone who understands contracts. I've spent most of my career reading them." "I'm sure you have." He laughed softly. "The difference is that attorneys usually work for people like me." His confidence attracted laughter from several nearby guests. "They protect transactions." He paused. "They don't create fortunes." I returned his smile. "Sometimes." He tilted his head. "You disagree?" "I think fortunes last only when the paperwork survives." For the first time, his smile tightened. "Only slightly. Barely noticeable." Most people missed it. I didn't. The conversation ended politely. Neither of us raised our voices. Neither of us needed to. As I walked toward the exit, I noticed several elderly couples gathering around Brielle's promotional display. She patiently explained how Ethan's newest real estate fund would generate long-term wealth while revitalizing historically Black neighborhoods. One retired teacher clutched a brochure. Another couple quietly discussed investing retirement savings accumulated over 35 years. They trusted her. Not because they understood the prospectus. Because they believed her smile. Watching them unsettled me. Money represented decades of sacrifice. Night shifts. Second jobs. Missed birthdays. Careful budgeting. People weren't investing numbers. They were investing their futures. Still, I walked away without saying anything. Not yet. Later that evening, Marcus found me reviewing publicly available filings at our kitchen table. My husband quietly poured 2 cups of coffee before sitting beside me. "You've been staring at those reports for an hour. I've seen stranger balance sheets." He reached toward one page. "Have you noticed this?" I followed his finger. A property valuation appeared significantly higher than comparable developments completed only months earlier. Marcus frowned. "This appraisal doesn't match county records." I remained silent. He turned another page. "And these acquisition costs jumped almost 22% without explanation." I leaned back. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows. The room smelled of coffee and approaching thunderstorms. Marcus studied my face. "You already saw this." "Maybe." "Naomi." "What?" "You don't look surprised." I've learned surprises usually happen to people who aren't paying attention. He smiled slightly. "So, what are you thinking?" I closed the folder. "Nothing. You never review financial statements for nothing." I stood and carried my coffee toward the window overlooking the city lights. Behind me, Marcus quietly continued examining the documents. Several minutes passed before he spoke again. "These numbers don't feel right." I looked outside without answering. Cars moved steadily through wet streets below. Somewhere across the city, Brielle was probably celebrating another successful day. Somewhere else, families were transferring retirement savings into accounts they believed were safe. And somewhere beyond all of them, the truth waited patiently. I wasn't ready to move. Not yet. Because if Ethan Caldwell's financial reports were genuine, then I had somehow forgotten everything I had spent my career learning. But numbers never lie. People do. The ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers. their warm light reflecting across polished marble floors like calm water. A string quartet played softly near the stage while servers moved through the crowd carrying silver trays filled with sparkling drinks. Every table held fresh white orchids, each arrangement chosen to symbolize family legacy. I almost laughed at the irony. Nothing inside my family had ever been that pure. I stood near the back of the room, unnoticed despite wearing my best navy suit. I had learned years ago that invisibility could become an advantage if I stopped fighting it. My parents stood proudly beside my younger sister, Alana, welcoming guests with effortless smiles. Local business leaders shook hands with them. A state senator posed for photographs. Two judges exchanged pleasantries with my father, while reporters documented every carefully rehearsed moment. To everyone else, we looked like the perfect family. Appearances had always been my mother's favorite investment. "Smile," she whispered as she walked past me. "People are watching." I am smiling. Bigger. She didn't wait for my answer. She never did. A few moments later, my father stepped onto the stage and tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight isn't just about charity. It's about celebrating leadership." Applause filled the ballroom. He extended his arm toward Alana. "My daughter has built relationships that will carry this family's name into the future." More applause. Then his eyes settled on me. "And success requires vision. Not everyone understands how wealth is created." Several people glanced in my direction. He smiled politely before delivering the sentence I knew he had prepared. "Some people become attorneys because they help successful people. Others become successful." A few guests laughed awkwardly. I didn't. I simply folded my hands and met his eyes. He wanted embarrassment. I offered composure. That disappointed him far more. After the speeches, conversations resumed as though nothing unusual had happened. Wealthy donors praised the gala. Photographers surrounded Alana. My father accepted compliments with quiet satisfaction. They believed they had won another public victory. They had absolutely no idea public victories often leave private fingerprints. I left without saying goodbye. By 11:47 p.m., my office overlooked a city glowing beneath scattered rain clouds. The building had emptied hours earlier. The only sounds came from distant traffic and the steady hum of the air conditioning. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to stop pretending. I sat alone at my desk. The silence became unbearable. Every childhood memory returned at once. The birthdays where my achievements were forgotten. The graduations that somehow became celebrations for someone else. The promotions that earned polite nods instead of pride. I rested my forehead against folded hands. Tears finally arrived. Quiet. Steady. Unseen. Not because I had lost money. Not because I had been humiliated. Because somewhere inside me, a little girl was still hoping her parents would choose her just once. When the tears stopped, something inside me had changed. I walked into the restroom, washed my face with cold water, and stared into the mirror. I can't build a future by chasing people determined to leave me behind. The reflection didn't answer. It didn't need to. I returned to my desk and closed the family photo that had remained there for years. I placed it inside a drawer. Then I locked the drawer. Some doors deserve to stay closed. The following morning felt strangely peaceful. At 8:30 a.m., I arrived at the downtown office of retired Judge Harold Whitaker, my late grandfather's oldest friend. His office smelled of leather-bound books and freshly brewed coffee. Morning sunlight filtered through tall windows, illuminating decades of legal history lining the shelves. He stood as I entered. "You look tired." "I finally slept." He nodded slowly. Sometimes clarity arrives after disappointment. He opened a safe hidden behind a framed landscape painting and removed a sealed envelope along with a small flash drive. Your grandfather instructed me to give you these only when the time was right. My pulse quickened. He believed there might come a day when appearances would outweigh integrity. Judge Whitaker placed the items gently on the desk. He wanted someone prepared to protect what truly mattered. I picked up the envelope. The paper felt heavier than it should have. Inside were notarized trust documents, handwritten notes, and carefully organized records explaining how the family's charitable assets were meant to be safeguarded if conflicts of interest or financial misconduct ever threatened them. Nothing accused anyone directly. Everything emphasized accountability. My grandfather had planned for honesty, not revenge. I understood immediately. This wasn't a weapon. It was a responsibility. Judge Whitaker watched quietly. What will you do now? I looked down at the documents before answering. I'm done trying to prove I deserve my family's approval. He smiled. Good. From this moment forward, I intend to protect the people who trusted them. He extended his hand. I believe your grandfather hoped you'd say exactly that. As I walked back into the morning sunlight with the sealed documents in my briefcase, I realized I wasn't carrying evidence against my family. I was carrying a promise. And that was the exact moment my heart stopped asking for love and my mind started preparing for war. By the time everyone believed the story was over, mine had only just begun. I stopped arguing. I stopped defending myself. Most importantly, I stopped announcing what I was doing. Silence has a way of making arrogant people careless. Every morning, I arrived at my office before 7 a.m. while the city still yawned awake beneath the gray sky. Fresh coffee filled the conference room, fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the only sounds came from my keyboard and the steady rhythm of pages turning. On the surface, I was simply another attorney reviewing public records. In reality, I was building a timeline. One document at a time. Corporate registrations. Annual disclosures. Property transfers. Mortgage filings. Bankruptcy records. Each file looked harmless by itself. Together, they told a very different story. The celebrated investment company at the center of every headline had quietly created a network of limited liability companies across 3 states. Properties changed hands between businesses controlled by the same executives, yet each sale magically increased the reported value. The numbers looked impressive. Too impressive. I highlighted every inconsistency. Not because I wanted revenge. Because numbers deserve honesty. People trust them. One afternoon, I attended another charity luncheon where the firm's founder, Daniel Harper, spoke confidently about creating opportunity. Television cameras followed him through the ballroom. Community leaders applauded. Retirees waited patiently to ask investment questions. He noticed me near the refreshment table. "Counselor," he said with a grin. "Still reading paperwork? I enjoy reading." He chuckled loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "People like me build wealth." He tapped the stack of brochures beside him. "People like you organize the folders." A few guests laughed politely. I smiled. "I hope your records stay organized." His expression tightened for only a second. "What does that mean?" "It means exactly what I said." I picked up a glass of water and walked away. No accusation. No argument. No drama. Behind me, the conversation resumed. They thought they had witnessed another harmless exchange. They had absolutely no idea I already possessed months of publicly available records arranged in chronological order. Back at my office, I continued working. A transfer authorized on Monday matched a property purchased 6 months earlier. Another filing referenced a company that appeared to own nothing except another company. The pattern repeated. Again. And again. Late Thursday evening, my colleague Evelyn entered my office carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You've been staring at that wall all day." My office whiteboard was covered with dates, arrows, company names, and handwritten notes. "I've been staring at a story," She handed me a cup. Good story? Not for everyone. She studied the board. I don't understand half of this. You don't need to. What are you looking for? The one mistake confidence always makes. She smiled. Overconfidence? I nodded. Exactly. Powerful people often believe complexity hides truth. Experience had taught me the opposite. Complexity usually reveals it. The breakthrough arrived on a quiet Friday morning. A filing amended 6 months after its original submission referenced a valuation that contradicted an earlier mortgage document. Different numbers. Same property. Same signatures. Different story. I leaned back in my chair. There you are. Nobody heard me. Nobody needed to. I carefully organized every document into a digital binder with indexed exhibits, explanatory notes, and source references. Every page could be independently verified. Every conclusion rested on documented facts rather than assumptions. Preparation mattered. Emotion didn't. At exactly 2:18 p.m., I closed my office door. I picked up my phone. My hand remained steady. After one deep breath, I contacted the appropriate federal office responsible for reviewing potential financial misconduct involving securities and investment activity. The conversation remained professional. I identified myself. I explained that I had organized publicly available information suggesting irregularities worthy of review. I offered documentation. Nothing more. No dramatic speech. No personal accusations. When the call ended, I returned my phone to the desk and opened the next client file waiting for me. Life continued. Outside, traffic flowed through downtown streets. Inside, my calendar remained full. I told no one. Not my coworkers. Not my friends. Not even the people who had underestimated me. Several days later, whispers began circulating through the business community. A regulatory inquiry had requested supporting records from multiple companies connected to the investment group. Executives who once smiled for every camera suddenly canceled interviews. Meetings became closed-door sessions. Public confidence started to wobble. I happened to see Daniel again at another networking event. For the first time since we'd met, he wasn't smiling. He approached me quickly. Have you heard what's happening? I've heard several things. He searched my face for an answer I never intended to give. This is ridiculous, he muttered. Someone's trying to damage my company. I simply looked at him. No accusation. No satisfaction. Only silence. The longer I said nothing, the more uncomfortable he became. He straightened his tie, cleared his throat, forced another smile. I'll handle it. I'm sure you'll respond however you think is appropriate. He waited. I offered nothing else. As he walked away, his confident stride had disappeared. For years, people believed strength meant speaking the loudest. They were wrong. Sometimes the strongest move is allowing the truth to arrive on its own schedule. For the first time in years, my silence became louder than their insults. The courtroom felt colder than I expected, not because of the air conditioning, because every familiar face reminded me how quickly people confuse confidence with truth. Morning light slipped through the tall windows, painting pale rectangles across polished wooden floors. Attorneys arranged thick binders on counsel tables while spectators whispered behind the gallery railing. Court officers moved quietly between rows, their measured footsteps echoing through the chamber. I adjusted the sleeve of my navy blazer and sat down without looking toward my family. I already knew where they were. My father occupied the front row with perfect posture, wearing the same expression he reserved for award ceremonies and church anniversaries. My mother sat beside him, her hands folded neatly across her purse, smiling politely at everyone who recognized her. To anyone watching, they looked proud. Not of me. Of the version of the story they believed would survive the day. My younger sister, Alana, entered moments later beside Victor Langford, the investment executive everyone in the city seemed determined to admire. Magazine covers had called him a visionary. Television interviews praised his generosity. Local politicians eagerly accepted photographs with him during fundraising events. He wore confidence the way other people wore expensive watches. Comfortably. He caught my eye across the room and smiled. I hope you brought more than paperwork. I brought the truth. He laughed softly. Truth doesn't move markets. It usually moves courtrooms. Several attorneys nearby glanced toward us before returning to their conversations. Victor leaned closer. You've spent your career reading contracts written by people like me. His voice carried quiet amusement. Don't confuse your license with power. I closed my notebook. I never have. He straightened his tie. When this hearing ends, you may want to consider another profession. I offered nothing beyond a polite smile. Silence unsettled him more than disagreement. He walked away first. They had absolutely no idea that arrogance often speaks long before evidence ever needs to. The hearing began promptly at 9 a.m. After preliminary matters concluded, witnesses entered one by one. A retired federal prosecutor explained standard compliance procedures surrounding investor disclosures. A forensic accountant carefully described irregular financial reporting methods commonly associated with concealed ownership structures. A banking compliance executive discussed transaction monitoring requirements designed to identify suspicious fund movements. Finally, the estate attorney responsible for drafting my grandfather's trust explained the legal duties imposed upon every future trustee. No witness exaggerated. No witness speculated. Every answer remained grounded in documents already admitted into evidence. Facts accumulated quietly, like rainfall. Across the aisle, Victor appeared relaxed. He occasionally whispered jokes to his attorneys. Once, he even smiled directly toward my parents. My father smiled back. He still believed he had chosen the winning side. When Victor finally took the witness stand, confidence filled every sentence. My companies have always operated within applicable regulations. His attorney nodded approvingly. Were all material transactions properly documented? Absolutely. Were investors treated fairly? Without exception. His answers arrived quickly. Too quickly. Cross-examination began. The questioning remained calm. No dramatic accusations. Only dates. Documents. Signatures. Transfer authorizations. Property valuations. Corporate resolutions. Piece after piece. Victor dismissed each exhibit with effortless confidence. Administrative oversight. Routine accounting. Standard restructuring. He sounded prepared. Until one document appeared on the courtroom monitor. His smile faded almost invisibly. The questioning continued. This authorization bears your electronic approval, correct? It appears to. You approve this restructuring? If that's my signature. No one else possessed authority to approve this category of transaction? Not at that time. Another document appeared. This transfer references the same holding company, does it not? Yes. And the prior valuation submitted 6 weeks earlier reflected a substantially different figure? It did. The courtroom remained perfectly quiet. The attorney paused. Can you explain why? Victor shifted slightly in his chair. There were internal adjustments. What kind? Investment considerations. Specifically? He hesitated. Only briefly. Then came the mistake. I personally authorized consolidating those transactions before the final reporting package was prepared. Silence. Complete silence. The words seemed to linger inside the courtroom long after he finished speaking. His own attorney slowly lowered his pen. Across the gallery, several observers exchanged careful looks. My father frowned. He looked toward Victor. then toward the documents displayed on the courtroom screen. For the first time all morning, certainty disappeared from his face. Beside him, my mother quietly reached for his hand. Neither of them spoke. Alana stared toward the witness stand with widening eyes. She hadn't expected that answer either. Perhaps she had believed she was helping build something meaningful. Perhaps she had simply trusted the wrong person. Either way, realization arrived without mercy. Victor noticed the silence. He attempted to clarify. "That's not what I meant." No one interrupted him. He continued speaking. Each explanation created another question. Each answer narrowed his options. Confidence slowly transformed into caution, then into frustration, finally into visible uncertainty. I remained seated exactly where I had been since the hearing began. No celebration, no satisfaction, no anger, only patience. Years earlier, I believed justice required dramatic speeches. Experience had taught me otherwise. Truth usually arrives quietly. It simply refuses to leave. The presiding judge reviewed several pages before removing his glasses. He looked toward Victor with an expression impossible to misinterpret. The courtroom waited. No one moved. No one whispered. The judge finally spoke. "Thank you." He closed the file gently. "That answers every remaining question." The news broke on a quiet Tuesday morning. No dramatic sirens. No shouting reporters outside office buildings. Just a short press release published at 8:15 a.m., followed by headlines that spread across every financial website before most people finished their first cup of coffee. The investment firm that had promised prosperity was now operating under emergency regulatory restrictions. Several affiliated companies had their assets frozen while investigators completed a detailed review of financial records. Television commentators who once praised the firm's leadership suddenly spoke in cautious legal language. Words mattered now. Pending investigation. Civil enforcement. Investor protection. Confidence had disappeared from every interview. I watched the coverage from my office without feeling the satisfaction I once imagined justice might bring. Victory rarely looks the way people expect. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like accountability. By lunchtime, community organizations began contacting affected investors with information about restitution programs and legal resources. Elderly couples who feared they had lost decades of retirement savings finally heard the words they had been praying for. There is a path forward. Not everyone would recover everything, but many families would recover enough to rebuild. That mattered. It mattered far more than proving anyone wrong. Across town, people whispered about my family. The large house that had hosted holiday parties, charity dinners, and magazine photo shoots now stood behind a foreclosure notice after previously undisclosed debts surfaced during financial reviews. Neighbors slowed their cars while passing. Curiosity always arrives faster than compassion. My father resigned from the nonprofit board he had proudly served for years. The official statement described it as a personal decision. Everyone understood otherwise. Reputation had been the currency he valued most. Now it had depreciated overnight. My mother tried desperately to preserve normalcy. She continued attending luncheons and charity events for several weeks. Then the invitations stopped arriving. Phone calls became shorter. Messages went unanswered. The same people who once praised her grace quietly found new circles to admire. Appearances rarely survive public disappointment. I never celebrated any of it. Pain, even deserved pain, remains painful to witness. One afternoon, my father unexpectedly appeared outside my office. He looked older than I remembered. Not because of time, because certainty had left him. "I won't keep you long," he said. "I appreciate that." He looked toward the city skyline before speaking again. I thought success meant protecting the family name. I waited. I didn't realize I had forgotten to protect my family. The admission hung between us. No excuses. No arguments. Just honesty arriving years too late. I hope you find peace, I said quietly. He nodded once. Then he walked away. It wasn't reconciliation. Some wounds heal into scars rather than disappear. That is still healing. A few weeks later, I stood inside a renovated brick building that once housed a neighborhood library. Fresh paint brightened the walls, sunlight filled the classrooms, and the scent of newly cut wood lingered in the air. Above the entrance hung a simple sign: the Brooks Financial Learning Center. The center wasn't designed to create millionaires. It existed to help ordinary families understand contracts, mortgages, retirement planning, investment risks, and financial fraud before someone else made those decisions for them. Volunteer attorneys donated legal workshops. Retired accountants taught budgeting classes. Banking professionals explained consumer protections in plain language. Everything was free, exactly as my grandfather would have wanted. During the opening ceremony, reporters asked whether the center represented my revenge. I smiled gently. No. So what is it? A promise. What kind of promise? That fewer families will lose everything simply because they trusted the wrong person. The reporter lowered her microphone. No further explanation seemed necessary. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I walked through the empty classrooms one final time. Rows of chairs waited for tomorrow's students. Whiteboards stood ready for new lessons. Hope had quietly replaced headlines. I paused beneath my grandfather's framed photograph near the entrance. For the first time in many years, I felt something I had chased throughout my childhood. Not approval. Peace. Real peace never comes from watching other people fall. It comes from knowing you chose integrity when bitterness would have been easier. People spent years expecting me to seek revenge. Instead, I chose responsibility. They expected destruction. I built opportunity. They expected anger. I left behind understanding. As I switched off the lights and stepped into the cool evening air, I realized something my grandfather had tried to teach me long before I understood it. A legacy is never measured by what you keep. It is measured by what you leave behind. They spent years protecting appearances. I spent one afternoon protecting the truth. 6 months changed everything. Not because the world suddenly became fair. Because I finally stopped measuring my worth by the people who had never intended to see it. The autumn sun warmed the front steps of the Harrison Community Resource Center, a restored brick building that had once sat abandoned in the middle of the neighborhood. Children's laughter drifted from a classroom where volunteers were teaching financial literacy. Down the hallway, a retired attorney was explaining wills and trusts to young couples who wanted to protect the little they had built. A brass plaque beside the entrance caught the morning light. Established through the Harrison Family Educational Trust. My grandfather's name rested beneath it, exactly where it belonged. I stood quietly, breathing in the scent of fresh paint and newly planted flowers. Every dollar used to renovate the building had come from trust assets legally restored after months of litigation and court supervision. The money had finally reached the people my grandfather always intended to help. Scholarships, legal aid, small business workshops, retirement planning. Everything was free. Watching families walk through those doors gave me something I had chased my entire childhood. Peace. Not victory. Peace. Inside the auditorium, volunteers arranged chairs for another seminar. A grandmother hugged her grandson after learning he had received a scholarship funded by the center. Across the room, a single mother thanked one of our volunteer accountants for helping her understand mortgage documents before signing anything. No television cameras captured those moments. No newspaper headlines celebrated them. They mattered anyway. Sometimes the greatest victories happen where nobody is looking. As I finished reviewing the day's schedule, my assistant approached carefully. Naomi. I looked up. They're here. I already knew who she meant. They asked if they could speak with you. For a brief moment, old memories returned. Birthday parties where my accomplishments became someone else's celebration. Graduations followed by criticism instead of congratulations. Years spent believing one more achievement would finally earn unconditional love. Then the memories passed. I'll meet them outside. They were waiting beneath the oak tree near the parking lot. My father looked older than I remembered. His shoulders had lost the confidence they once carried into every room. My mother clutched her handbag with both hands, avoiding my eyes. Neither spoke immediately. Silence can reveal more than conversation. Finally, my father cleared his throat. I've had a long time to think. I listened. I spent most of my life chasing respect from strangers. His voice cracked slightly. I forgot to give it to my own daughter. The words landed gently. Years earlier, they would have meant everything. Now they simply existed. I'm sorry, he whispered. My mother stepped forward. I kept protecting appearances because I thought that was how families survived. A tear slipped down her cheek. I didn't realize appearances were destroying ours. I believed they meant every word. That didn't change what had happened. I forgive you, I said quietly. Relief crossed both of their faces. Then I continued. But forgiveness isn't the same as rebuilding trust. Neither interrupted. I hope you both find healing. My father nodded slowly. I understand. For the first time in my life, he truly did. They walked away together. I didn't stop them. Some chapters deserve a peaceful ending. They simply don't deserve another beginning. A few minutes later, I heard soft footsteps behind me. My younger sister stood several feet away. Gone were the designer clothes, television interviews, and perfectly rehearsed smiles. She looked like someone carrying the weight of difficult truths. I almost didn't come, she admitted. I'm glad you did. She looked toward the community center. I used to think admiration meant love. I stayed silent. And I thought success meant people envied you. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. I spent years chasing applause instead of becoming someone worth respecting. She laughed quietly at herself. I don't even know when I became that person. You know now. She nodded. I do. I'm sorry, Naomi. Not for one moment. Not for one decision. For years. I believed her. I'm trying to rebuild my life honestly, she said. I hope you do. Aren't you angry anymore? I smiled gently. Anger asks us to stay connected to the people who hurt us. She lowered her eyes. I don't want to be that person again. You don't have to be. We embraced briefly. Not because everything had been repaired. Because healing sometimes begins with honesty. When we stepped apart, we understood our futures would travel different roads. That was okay. Not every relationship returns to what it once was. Sometimes the healthiest version is one built on distance and respect. Later that afternoon, I stood before a group of scholarship recipients and their families. They expected a speech about success. Instead, I told them the truth. When I was younger, I believed wealth meant inheritance. Several students listened carefully. Later, I believed it meant professional achievement. I smiled. I was wrong both times. The room remained perfectly still. Real wealth is waking up each morning without needing someone else's approval to know your value. I looked around the room. No title can give you that. No amount of money can buy it. No family can take it away once you decide it belongs to you. The applause that followed sounded different from every applause I had heard before. It wasn't celebrating status. It was celebrating hope. Months passed. Life continued. My father quietly retired from public leadership and spent most of his time volunteering where nobody recognized his name. My mother slowly rebuilt relationships through humility instead of appearances. My sister found honest work far from cameras and social media, discovering dignity inside ordinary days. The businessman whose greed harmed so many families faced justice through the legal system and would never again manage public investments. As for me, I never became famous. I became useful. Every scholarship awarded, every family protected, every young entrepreneur who learned how to read a contract before signing it. That became my legacy. If you've listened to my story this far, I want you to remember one thing. People may reject you. They may underestimate you. They may even convince you that your worth depends on their acceptance. Don't believe them. Build your character instead of your image. Protect your integrity instead of your pride. Because the greatest revenge isn't watching the people who broke you lose everything, it's becoming someone they can never control again.